Here we are at Sam Houston Park behind a building that the sign literally says is called Old Place to film episode 3 of Jon Gets Lit. This is a series that started off bad, but I'm going to keep doing it over and over and over again until it gets better. Speaking of Ka, I'm here.
Bag in the shop.
Bag?
Your bag is in the shop. Your messenger bag is in the shop.
I'm here with my friend Brandon Nash, one-time cameraman, longtime friend, to discuss the Dark Tower series, a weird epic fantasy by an obscure author named Stephen King. Brandon's actually read this book.
I have.
Something that my previous guest had not done, so I promise this time I will do less talking, although not that much less. That's just my brand. So the Dark Tower, I won't be like all the other people who talk about it and read the first line, although the first line is very significant. It's about a man named Roland, who you find out later is of royal blood, who is sort of like a cowboy, although cowboys are like knights in this world. And he's on a journey. He's looking for something. He's looking for the Dark Tower, but he's also chasing this man in black. And the first chapter of the book, which, by the way, was not a book originally, it was originally short stories that were published in separate journals, which is why if you read this book, you might feel that it's a little disjointed, as I felt. I don't know about, what did you think whenever you first read it?
It's certainly different than other novels. It's not as smooth of a story, but I think it's a good intro to the setting and character.
I think it does what Stephen King does in all of his books, which is does a really good job of character building and also setting up themes. The plot can feel a little disjointed to me. Like I said, when I first read it, I didn't love the first book. And actually, I was looking online. There are a lot of people who suggest not reading this book first. They call it like a prequel. They suggest reading The Drawing of the Three first and then going back and reading this. What do you think about that?
I'll be honest, the first book got me hooked. I think I understand the issue that people have, but I think sort of the mystery and vagueness just kind of left me wanting more, and that's what encouraged me to keep reading the series.
Roland journeys into this town where there's been a trap laid by the man in black, and the town has been whipped up into a frenzy. Like a lot of other Stephen King books, I think the town is like, he talks about Christianity in the book, and the town is like a Christian cult or something. And he ends up basically having to fight the entire town in his pursuit of the man in black. I don't know, you can tell me what you remember about that scene or...
Yeah, basically the whole town is turned against him in their sort of fanaticism, I guess you could call it. And in his attempts to continue his pursuits, he has to basically slaughter everyone in the town in order to escape because they're all just viciously attacking him.
Right, which I think, again, Stephen King his themes and his symbolism in his books are his main focus, I think, and character building. And I think what he's trying to tell us is, A, this guy is not afraid to kill. B, he's not afraid to do anything, it seems, to get to his goal.
Right.
He'll slaughter an entire town full of strangers, whether they're misguided or not. He doesn't even really seem to take the time to figure that out. It also shows us that he's a very talented warrior. I mean, if you can take on an entire town and come out pretty good, I think he might have some injuries.
Yeah, I think this is the first example of exactly like what a gunslinger is. He has almost a superhuman speed and aim.
Yeah, that's true. So we go from there. His mule ends up dying. I think one of the other issues with the story that it kind of threw me a little bit is that there's sort of like a story within a story within a story, because I think even before this, he actually meets Jake, or he meets somebody in the desert, and then he tells the story of Tull. So he goes back to this, And then there's another go back. So it's like a story within a story. It's really strange how it's structured. But I think it's structured like that because they were written months apart, and they were written for short stories and not necessarily for the novel. Although it has been put together in a novel and revised, and I would suggest getting the revised edition. I think that's probably the best bet. The revised edition jives more with the rest of the series. But then, yeah, he meets this boy, Jake, who claims that he is from modern day New York. You already get some sense of like that this is not just like a Western.
Right, exactly. When he's in that town at a saloon, there's a jukebox playing Hey Jude.
Hey Jude, and then there's other like modern references. And then he meets this boy, Jake, who, where does Jake come from? Do you remember?
He explains that I think the last memory he has is being hit by a car, which cars do not seem to exist where Roland is from, so it's very confusing and intriguing. The other flashback that you mentioned to
Story within a story within a
when
story.
Roland was a child, it's the story of his training and I guess final test with his master, in which they I guess sort of have to have a duel as a rite of passage, basically. Would you say that's?
Yeah, and it's weird because you get the sense that it's like a monarchy. His dad's the king. He's the prince, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like Old West. Like they've got guns.
Exactly. But like you said before, they have guns, but they function like a society of knights almost.
I think they talk about whenever he gets to the town, people are like, "Oh, a gunslinger!" Like it's like, "Oh, someone here that we can be supported by," or like they give him food because it's like, "Oh, he's a gunslinger. He's a positive person in this world."
And so in this fight, he's told that he can bring one weapon of his choosing, and he decides to bring his pet hawk, which is, not just his pet, but also his friend.
Yeah, and we totally remember his name, but it's also right here in text.
And he seems, to have a loving relationship with this hawk, but he knows that it's also a vicious creature that he can use. And he ends up sicking it against his master, which just completely destroys his master's face and wins him the fight. But in the process...
The man who trained him.
Yeah. But in the process, the bird gets killed because the man has to defend himself. And that's sort of the first glimpse of the fact that he's willing to sacrifice pretty much anything to achieve his goals, even his pet.
Yeah, his pet and his teacher.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that, but he also just kind of, I guess you're fighting your teacher, but still that's a brutal way to win. But I think also those early scenes, or that story going back, is kind of to explain why he's so hardened now. Mm-hmm. That at a young age, he had to go through that. Also, he kind of loses his mom and dad because there's a whole bunch of in court intrigue, and you find out that the man in black is maybe by another name, but is sort of involved with seducing his mom and causing problems with his father.
Right.
So it's like at a young age he loses his parents and he's forced to hurt the person who trained him and sort of go off on his own. And you don't learn more about his backstory until later books, but you get the sense right there he's been hardened and he's learned to make sacrifices. Here's another sense that this world is somehow connected to ours. They go to these mountains or caves and they have to fight their way through slow muties, which are radioactive mutated people. Mm-hmm. So you get the sense that maybe, and they also talk kind of that this is the after times or something like that. The world was a certain way and now it's not. So that maybe there was a nuclear holocaust that took us back to the old ages. It's very confusing in this first book.
Yeah, so as they're still fleeing from the mutants at this point, I believe, and that's why there's such a sense of urgency. The tunnel begins to collapse, and Jake is falling, and Roland is sort of torn for a second, but I would say pretty quickly he decides to just leap over the chasm leaving the boy behind because he doesn't want to risk losing the man in black.
Right.
Which, once again, this just shows his character that, he'll slaughter an entire town and he will leave a child to die.
Arguably become his friend at this point.
So there's no love for this character. I mean, this is a main character who is not... You almost don't... The only reason you might root for him is because you think he's cool or interesting.
But he's certainly not a hero.
He's not a hero, yeah. I shouldn't even say hero. He's a protagonist.
Yeah.
To be honest, you would probably root for Jake if you were rooting for the moral hero of the story.
Right.
He's an innocent kid who's done nothing wrong, but who has died twice now.
Mm-hmm.
He's been pushed in front of a car and now is being left for dead so that Roland can continue to chase the man in black.
Right. So while his age is never stated, it's implied that he's quite old at this point, so you can only assume that he's gone through quite a bit of hardship in this long journey to catch the man in black and avenge his family.
He's also aged within the story. I want to pull up the quote here that you sent to me so I can read it right, but he finds the man in black, and I think this is beautiful too, because looking back on it, Stephen King warns you in the last book that the series is not going to end the way you think it's going to end. It's not going to be like Lord of the Rings where there's these big glorious battles and that kind of thing. It's going to end in a more literary way. And I would argue that he kind of sets you up for that here, because I thought he's going to catch the man in black after making all these sacrifices. The idea was
a showdown.
A shootout,
right.
But there's not.
Exactly.
Instead, they sit down with some tarot cards.
Yeah, they just have a conversation by a campfire, pretty much.
And the man in black reads his future, and you're introduced to characters that you won't see really until the drawing of the next book, the Lady of the Shadows and the prisoner. But the part that hooked me in the book the most is this last conversation. The man in black tells this to Roland. He says, "You see, size defeats us. For the fish, the lake in which he lives is the universe. What does the fish think when he's jerked up by the mouth through the silver limits of existence and into a new universe where the air drowns him and the light is blue madness, where huge bipeds with no gills stuff it into a suffocating box and cover it with wet weeds to die? Or one might take the tip of a pencil and magnify it. One reaches the point where a stunning realization strikes home. The pencil tip is not solid. It is composed of atoms which whirl and resolve like a trillion demon planets. Which seems solid to us is actually only a loose net held together by gravity. Viewed at their actual size, the distances between these atoms might become league, gulfs, aeons. The atoms themselves are composed of nuclei and revolving protons and electrons. One may step down further to subatomic particles, and then to what? Tachyons? Nothing? Of course not. Everything in the universe denies nothing. To suggest an ending is the one absurdity." And I remember, after I read that, just thinking, I don't care how many books there are, I'm going to read the rest of them. And of course, Stephen King is drawing from Eastern philosophy, which he does a lot in his books. A lot of people say that these books are a departure from his other books because it's not strictly horror. But in my opinion, you see tons of Stephen King themes. I mean, Roland's dead pursuit towards the Dark Tower and the Man in Black, to me, at first, I thought it signified or symbolized addiction. Willing to sacrifice others to get there and that kind of thing. But then I was also thinking about it, and the whole obsession with Eastern philosophy and that kind of thing, it reminds me of Buddhist teachings that say when you reach for heaven or when you reach for nirvana, you'll never get it. He can sacrifice everything. He can do whatever he wants to try to get it, but he will never get it because he's so dead in pursuit of it. And it's not until you stop pursuing something so single-mindedly that you are finally at peace. We can't talk about every single book. And honestly, I would argue that not every book should be talked about. But I just want to talk about The Dark Tower in general and why I love it and the whole series. I might do an episode later where we talk about The Drawing of the Three because it's my favorite book. But for now, we'll just talk about The Dark Tower in general. So, I love it because of the flawed protagonist, Roland, but also because of the growth you see in the character. And people who have finished the series, if you understood what the end is about, you'll understand that in my opinion, it's about growth. You were saying that you felt, when it ended, you said you felt not hopeful, or what? How did you feel after you read it?
So when I was reading the ending,
Yeah.
and I realized what was happening, my first reaction was to audibly yell no out loud as I was reading. Once I understood what was happening, I was
You were frustrated for Roland?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I was frustrated, but that doesn't mean it's a bad ending.
Yeah.
It's just, I guess, an unfortunate ending.
I guess, yeah.
Uh,
See, okay, well, so it's not.
But
a
I would
spoiler.
argue that is a good
Yeah.
ending in terms of a literary standpoint, if it can cause me to
Yeah.
verbally exclaim at the end of reading the book. But it does, even though it's the end of the series, it gives you hope for Roland's future, I guess.
I think so. So when I read it, I mean, I like frustrating things. I mean, not only is it good literarily, but I think it's also good, period, because I think it's hopeful, the ending of the book. So no spoilers. I mean, he says it's unfortunate. I think it's just hopeful. I don't think it's unfortunate at all. Like I think it's literally a positive thing, because you read the series, and the series is pretty dark.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they call it the Dark Tower. And the series is pretty dark. A lot of messed up stuff happens. You know, if you've read the first book or if you've listened to the video and I've talked about it, you know, he sacrifices people who are not bad and want to help him. But he's also learning and growing. And I think that the reason I love that flawed protagonist, experiencing people who are not as flawed as him, although they're all flawed, and coming into contact with them actually gives them purpose. But I think his purpose is so powerful that it brings people in. But I think they also, just like, you know, the moon orbiting around the Earth, has an effect on him. You know, causes a little tidal shift in his outlook and his behavior. And even when he does have to make sacrifices later on in the series, I think those sacrifices hurt him more apparently.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it. You know, an anti-hero is always exciting to me. You know, you mentioned, like, it's not like Lord of the Rings, which is a classic and
Stephen King,
a favorite of mine.
Self-proclaimed Stephen King says, "This is my Lord of the Rings," or "This is what I wanted to make a Lord of the Rings, and this is what he made." But it's not.
Yeah, but after having read, like, a lot of classic fantasy, it's nice to see something different from that. Not just a noble, purely good hero. It's more interesting and probably more real to have a deeply flawed character like this. So that's definitely a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I think the setting, as I mentioned from book one, while I don't think it's ever fully explained what or when they are, but you just get glimpses of the relationship between this world and ours throughout the whole series, and I think those parts are always just very interesting.
Yeah. The other thing that I love about the series are the themes of, you know, without giving away the plot, of redemption and second chances. Arguably, all the characters that are introduced in the second book, The Drawing of the Three, with the exception of the sort of antagonist that kind of runs through their stories, they're all in need of redemption. And not only are they in need of redemption, but it's sort of not their fault that they are the way they are. So they've had things that have affected them when they were younger or in the past that have led them up. I think it's Eddie with his brother, and Odetta with the trauma that she incurs when she's younger.
Right.
And so it's sort of saying, like, we're not irredeemable. And then with the whole idea of Eastern philosophy, you know, even beyond this lifetime and beyond this universe, our soul is not redeemable. Or our soul is redeemable. Yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, you know, the incorporation of the Eastern philosophy is nice because I feel like often we're just presented with this strict idea of good or evil, whereas this tries to take into account I would say, aspects of karma and rebirth, and showing that if not physically, people can, emotionally and spiritually be reborn, and they can change.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Let's talk about how good the movie is.
Okay.
Let's go on record as saying that movie, I have not seen it.
I haven't actually seen it either, but I don't want to. Because
Idris Elba's great. I was excited when I saw that he was cast. Matthew McConaughey is great. I was excited when I saw that he was cast. After watching True Detective, I was like, holy cow, this is going to be great. I don't know why they did that movie the way they did it.
I saw a lot of action and even like magic and stuff in the trailer.
It is bizarre.
It was weird.
And again, I have not seen it. But I know that it's bad from just 2.5 minutes of like trailer. So don't see the movie. Read the book. Read Gunslinger first. Definitely read The Drawing of the Three because it's the best book in my opinion. But finish the series because the ending, I think, brings it all together.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I think that we might have actually done our best for the first time. It only took 3 tries. We didn't strike out, which is pretty amazing because I've struck out a lot. I used to play baseball and I was not a good hitter.